Hey Algebra 1, this is your last video. We are almost there. You guys have done a great job. We are going to talk about solving quadratics by factoring. Hopefully factoring went okay last week. If not, do not worry. It's not the end of the world. We will cover a lot of this in Algebra 2. You'll probably need a refresher anyway after having geometry next year. So we are going to go over some of the details that you have had to do a little bit from the CUDA software worksheet that you did last week. So we're going to kind of go, Khan Academy, I looked at the wrong section. You watched some Khan Academy videos, you tried a couple from the book. We are simply going to try a bunch and just practice. There is no homework tonight. Your assessment will cover a little bit tomorrow. Do your best to follow along, kind of practice some of these with me, and please reach out if you have questions and some of this doesn't make sense. All right, so when we are solving something by factoring, first of all, let's talk about what a quadratic is. Quadratic has an x squared factor. So we often have been dealing with a linear equation. So a linear equation, as you remember, was y equals mx plus b. You see this little nothingness up there, right? That means there's really an invisible 1, or we just have x to the first power and it creates a line that goes on forever and always. Well, if we were to square x, what happens is we then get what looks like a parabola, and it can be either upwards or downwards, and this is what we call a quadratic function. So when it crosses the x-axis, you now have 2 points, or we have an x squared. So instead of there being one solution for x, or one x-intercept, there are going to be 2. So x to the first power, when it's a linear, let me rewrite this. This is linear. You have x equals, and you can find one answer. When you have ax squared, this is just the general form. Or if you had x squared plus 2x plus 3, anything like that. If your largest term has a degree of 2, well, then this is a quadratic equation, and x is going to equal one thing, and x is going to equal another. There are 2 answers, and you have to have 2. It's not like one or the other. The solution to the problem is x equals something and x equals something else. Okay? So I know that's kind of a lot there, but we're essentially going to find 2 things, and we're going to do that by factoring. So to factor, we're essentially taking... Let me change my marker here a little bit. Okay, so if we are undistributing something, this is very difficult, and I'm hoping that you at least were able to practice a couple, or at least understand these. Remember, you can always multiply it back through and see if it goes back to what it was at the beginning. So if my generic term has 2 plus signs, then I know I'm going to have an x plus something and an x plus something. If I have a plus sign as this second term, I always use the same sign. So if it's a plus, I'm going to have the same sign, a plus and a plus. If it's a plus here and it's a minus here, then I'm going to have x minus and x minus. If your second symbol is a minus sign, then it doesn't matter what's first. You're going to have one of each, x plus something and x minus, x plus something and x minus. Just some tips. Hopefully that makes sense a little bit as we look at this. It's just kind of thinking through. So this has a factor of 1 to start with. When you had a factor that was larger than 1, you did not have to do those. Those were kind of just challenge problems. We're going to have x here and an x here, because the only way to get x squared is to say x times x. Okay? All right, so x times x. Because if we were to FOIL this, we would do this first times first, and then first times second. So I want to have 2 things here that equal a negative 3. 2 different terms that equal a negative 3, and those same 2 terms have to also, when you multiply them, give me a negative 10. So let's think about this. What are the terms of, for 10, I could have, let's look here, we're going to find the factors of 10. I could have 1 and 10, I could have 2 and 5. That's it. Could I somehow get 2 and 5 to equal 3? Or could I get 1 and 10 to equal 3? Now I could get 1 and 10 to be 11, or I could subtract them and get 9, but that's not going to give me 3, so it's not that one. 2 and 5, though, are going to get me, if I had a negative 5 and a positive 2, I could get to a negative 3, right? And negative 5 plus 2 is equal to negative 3. So if I were to put a negative 5 here and a plus 2, let's see if this works out. First times first gives me x squared. First times last gives me a positive 2x. Then I'm going to come down here to the bottom. Negative 5 times x is negative 5x. And negative 5 times a positive 2 is negative 10. All right, now I have some like terms, and I can combine these middle ones to give me a final answer of x squared, a positive 2 and a negative 5. This is what we just did right here. Gives me negative 3x minus 10. Is that what I started with? Yes, it is. Okay, so in order to factor this, don't worry about this equals 0 yet, I guess. We had, get my marker here. Okay, we had the x squared minus 3x minus 10, and we factored it into x minus 5 times x plus 2. All right, these are equal to each other. They're the exact same thing, they're just written differently. I could say 10, or I could say 5 times 2, right? Aren't those the same thing? This is just factored form. There's two factors. Here, there's this factor and there's this factor. Factors are all of the things, these are binomials inside the parentheses, so I'm going to multiply them together, so there's two factors here. All right? Now, if I'm trying to solve this, the first thing I need to do is set it equal to 0. And it was given to me as set equal to 0. How would I get two things to equal 0? If I had 5 times something equals 0, well, what would I have to do? If I had something times 3 equals 0, what do I fill in those holes with? I would have to have a 0, right? So if I made this be 0, 0 times x plus 2, wouldn't that equal 0? Well, it sure would. What if I said x minus 5, and then I made this part be 0 times 0? Would that give me 0? Well, it sure would. So we're going to try to find what could I plug in for x that would make the whole thing be equal to 0. All right, so if I set both of these equal, you're going to take one of your parentheses and set it equal to 0, and then you're going to take the other one and set it equal to 0. Okay, so I'm just getting this straight from up here, and I'm getting this one straight from up here from my factored form. And then we'll check it. All right, so x minus 5 equals 0, and I'm going to solve for x. That means I have to add 5 to both sides. So x is going to equal 5. Over here, I'm going to say x plus 2 equals 0, and I'd have to subtract 2 from both sides, and I could solve to say that x equals negative 2. So I'm going to say that my answer is x equals 5 and x equals negative 2, but we have to check it still. So we had x, let's see, x minus 5 and x plus 2, is that right? All right, so if I put in this first 5, if I were to put a 5 in for x, do I get 0? 5 minus 5, this gives me 0, times 5 plus 2 is 7. This is supposed to be 0, excuse me. Does that equal 0? Yeah, well, 0 equals 0, sure does. Okay, what if I were to plug in a negative 2 for x, right? Because that's my other possibility. So if I were to say negative 2, that gives me a negative 2 minus a 5 is a negative 7. Negative 2 plus 2 is 0. Anything times 0 is 0. Okay, so both of these do work. You could also plug this into your x squared minus 3x minus 10, which is the original. We could say 5 squared minus 3 times 5. All I'm doing is still plugging in one of my answers over here for 0, or for x, excuse me. Alrighty. 5 squared gives me 25 minus 15 minus 10 Does this all equal 0? 25 minus 25 equals 0. Yes, 0 equals 0, so it works. Let's try the other one. If I were to say -2, let's get this out of the way here. Instead of x, we're going to put in a -2. -2 squared is 4 minus 3 times a -3 times a -2 gives me +6 minus 10. Does this equal 0? 10 minus 10 equals 0. 0 equals 0. It sure does. So here are my two solutions, and you have just solved a quadratic by factoring. Once you factor it, we just set both of those parentheses separately equal to 0, just like we did here. We took one of them, set it equal to 0, took the other one, set it equal to 0, and it gives you your two answers. Okay, so let's try another one here. So here's another example. The first step, step number 1, is to factor. Because I want to have something in parentheses, so I have something in parentheses so I can set it equal to 0. Because then I can make this be equal to 0, and I can make the other one be equal to 0, and find my two answers. Okay, so let's factor this. And because my second sign here is a positive, I know I'm going to have x plus something, and I'm going to have the same sign, I should say. Because this is a plus sign here, I'm going to have the same sign. And whatever this sign is will be the same sign inside both of my parentheses. X plus and x plus. There's a 1 here. X squared is x times x. So I have to find some factors of 12 that when I add or subtract them, get me to 8. So the factors of 12 are 1 and 12. I could have 2 and 6. I could have 3 and 4. Do any of these get me to 8 pretty easily? Well, 2 plus 6 gets me to 8. So if I had 2 plus x plus 2 times x plus 6, that should get me there. Let's just try it out. You can always multiply through to check. X squared plus 6x plus 2x plus 12. X squared plus, and then combine these two, gives you 8x plus 12. And that is what I started with. Okay, so we're going to have that set equal to 0 still. But really, we just need to get this factor. That was all just to check to make sure we have the right factors. You do not have to do that every single time. But if you are uncertain, if you actually factored something properly, you can always check it that way. All right, so here's what I have factored. All right, so I'm just going to take this and set it equal to 0, and take this and set it equal to 0. Okay, so let's take this section here. Oops, that did not work as cleanly as I hoped. And set it equal to 0. And then let's take this section here and set it equal to 0 also. X plus 2 equals 0. I can drop the parentheses. There's nothing to distribute anymore. X equals a -2. I'm subtracting 2 from both sides. X equals -6. And there you have it. That is it. So the solution to x squared plus 8x plus 12 equals 0 is x is equal to -2 and -6, or -6 and -2. You can list it this way, or you could also write it like this with a comma. Either way is fine with me. All right, let's do one that's a little bit trickier. I'm not going to ask for you to do any like this year, but if you want to challenge yourself, I'm hopeful that you'll be interested in looking at this. This is a little bit harder to factor because I have a 2 in the front here. But if you look, every one of my coefficients here is actually divisible by 2. So if I were to divide everything here by 2, I could divide this whole side by 2, and I could divide this by 2. What is 0 divided by anything? Well, it's still 0, isn't it? So what's really happening here, actually, I'm going to write this separately. I'm dividing each one of these terms by 2. I have to divide the whole side by 2. So this just becomes x squared plus 4x minus 21, and it still equals 0. So I can actually solve it. It's a little bit more simplified. Okay, now that I have a coefficient of 1, it's going to be easier to factor now. All right, so let's check this sign that's on the right. Is it a positive sign? If it were positive, then I would use the same sign for both of my parentheses, but it's negative, which means I need to use one of each. Doesn't really matter which one goes where for right now. Put my x, and I need some factors of 21 that when I put them together, I'm going to get 4. So 1 times 21, I can't add or subtract those to get to 4. 21 is not divisible by 2. These are factors. 3 and 7, though. Oh, and 3 and 7, couldn't you subtract those and get to 4? So 7 minus 3 is equal to 4. That means I want a positive 7 plus a negative 3 to get to 4. So I'm going to want to put my 7 with the positive sign, and I'm going to want to put my 3 with the negative sign so it gets subtracted from that. And you could multiply this through to check, but we're not going to do that again right now. I've done it for all of the other ones. Now I'm just going to take this section, and we are going to set it equal to 0. And then we'll take this other section and we'll set it equal to 0. Let's just get rid of this over here. Okay, so equals 0 equals 0. These give me my two answers. So x plus 7 equals 0. Subtract 7 from both sides. X minus 3 equals 0. Add 3 to both sides. So x is going to equal 3 and negative 7. That is your answer. All right, last example, and then we are done. This one is going to be a little bit more complicated. We don't have all 3 terms initially when we look at it, so it feels a little bit more difficult here, but we can still factor something out. We're just not factoring the way we were previously. Is there anything that I can pull out from both 8x squared and negative 16x? Well, you might be looking at this and think, you could just divide both of these by 8, right? Just like we did before. We sure could. We could definitely do this. So then we're just going to get x squared minus 2x equals 0. But I still have this funny x, and I don't have another term here. I don't have a trinomial. So that's a little bit more simplified. But I could take an x out. This is like undistributing. Okay, to factor is to undistribute. So what I really have is 2 terms now. You could put parentheses around this. I could say x times x squared gives me, this should just be an x, excuse me. X times x gives me x squared, and x times negative 2 gives me negative 2x. Okay, so do I still have 2 factors? I sure do. So I am just going to set this first one equal to 0. And the second one, I'm going to set this equal to 0. Well, x equals 0. There's nothing else to do there to solve for x. It just already equals 0. And in this case, I'm going to have to add 2 to both sides, so x is going to be 2. So your final answer here will be x is equal to 0 and 2. All right, I hope this helps a little bit. I know these are very confusing, so it just takes a lot of practice. Continue to work on some of these. Do your best. Ask me questions along the way. And have a wonderful rest of your week. Can't wait to actually be with you guys again. Miss everyone.